The samurai. Some of the most feared and revered warriors of all time. Now, remains from samurai mass graves are casting an extraordinary new light on these legendary fighters.
Imagine what it must have been like if you're fighting with these.
Men were being cut down among the smoke and the flames.
The arrows probably penetrated into the brain matter, so that's a lethal injury.
Forensic investigation of their brutal injuries is solving the remarkable story of how the samurai fought and died. "48 kilometers south of Tokyo lies the coastal town of Kamakura. Here, 15 years ago, bulldozers digging the foundations for a car park make an astonishing discovery. They unearth a complete skeleton. They find more. Not tens or hundreds, but thousands. The discovery of a mass grave. It looks like the site of a great battle or massacre. Scientists at St. Mariana University School of Medicine near Tokyo examine skeletons from the mass graves.
体数としてはもう3000体以上で、でもすごい傷を負ってる人骨はいくつか出てます。
Mick Wazocki, a world expert on battle-scarred skeletons, joins the investigation. The big questions: what happened to these bones and why?
At the moment, as far as I know, these injuries are unique to Japanese medieval skeletons. I haven't seen any similar kind of sharp force trauma in a similar location. Neither have my Japanese colleagues.
This skeleton exhibits cut marks 1, 2, 3.
From behind?
Behind. Some very strange cut marks.
Yes.
Finish them off.
Finish.
This is consistent with the features of cut marks by Japanese sword.
Katana.
Katana.
The katana, legendary sword of the samurai. Like the European knights who live and die at the whim of their king, the samurai pledge allegiance to their feudal master. The team explores a startling idea that the skeletons connect to a major event recorded in a written chronicle of the time. A bloody civil war fought by samurai warriors, which climaxed in the year 1333. On one side, based in Kamakura, the shogunate, a military dictatorship headed by the Hojo family. On the other side, based in Kyoto, Emperor Go-Daigo, a man hell-bent on destroying the Hojo dictatorship and restoring imperial power to the nation.
Since the time of the first shogun of Japan, the military dictator, the emperors had been relegated to being mere figureheads. They were effectively religious figures, but had no real power. Emperor Go-Daigo changed all that. He was young, he was vigorous, he was brave, he was well trained in the martial arts. He wanted to rule Japan as his ancestors had done.
In the year 1333, these two rival powers clash with the utmost brutality. Two distinctive skeletons immediately stand out. The experts believe the location of these skeletons in the mass graves indicates when they die. Locked in an intimate embrace, this enigmatic couple lie on the fringes of the mass grave. That suggests they perish in the first stages of the war.
This is a very evocative assemblage. What we have here are two skeletons that were buried together in one grave. This individual's bones are much more slender. This individual is much more robust. So this is a male, and this is a female.
The remains of a man and woman, lying together in a lover's pose, is a mystery 7 centuries old.
We've also been able to determine that they're both of similar age, probably between the age of 25 to 35. Possibly they died pretty much at the same time, perhaps side by side. This could be husband and wife.
The wound marks on both skeletons match the unique style of a samurai sword fight. Samurai duels involve a ceremony of precise strikes that one by one bring an opponent to his knees.
This individual's body has got very, very nasty and vicious injuries.
Tension between the Hojo military dictatorship and the emperor escalates to all-out civil war. This Hojo samurai, his wife, and most probably their child, live outside the Kamakura stronghold. Without the protection of the city's walls, they're exposed to attack. Historian Tom Conlon uncovers contemporary illustrations that show the threat they face.
This image shows a night attack, and I think what's remarkable about this is because you see a depiction of a very intense encounter forcibly entering the house and attacking his family.
Danger looms for this family. A samurai assassin serving the Japanese emperor is on a stealth mission by night, camouflaging himself in the black armor of the Hojo themselves.
We know that they didn't die in an accident because they have some very, very nasty and vicious injuries, particularly the male.
The ritual of a samurai sword duel begins.
It's a very stylized, ritualized type of fighting, and very brutal as well.
The house was thought to be almost an autonomous area. The idea of protecting the house, I think, was a central thing to protecting these lands, so it had to be defended at all costs.
Fighting to protect his family, This man's duel is an opening skirmish in a war for the future soul of Japan. The Hojo samurai suffers his first wound, a katana blow to his left arm.
This bone is known as the radius. It's the bone that runs along this part of the arm and joins into the thumb. And he has a series of very deep gashes. This is sharp force trauma inflicted by a sword, and these are very heavy blows that have cut through soft tissue and sliced into the bone.
Cutting through the Hojo samurai's arm and deep into his bone. It's a classic defensive wound. Slashes to the defending arm render it useless, but aren't lethal. The Hojo samurai battles single-handed. His opponent weakened. The Emperor's samurai targets the head.
This looks what I'd call overkill. You can see here a series of cut marks. He's had a number of blows to the top of the head, which again was part of the fighting style. It was quite common to rain blows onto the head. Again, none of these are going to be killing blows. They're going to cause a lot. They're causing a lot of damage. There's little bits of bone flying out as you're being struck. You know, you can be pretty concussed. Blood is going to be pouring down, but that's not necessarily going to be lethal.
Horrifically wounded, the Hojo samurai fights on in the face of death. Forensic archaeologist Mick Wazocki focuses on the blows that end the samurai lord's life.
We can also see from the pattern of cuts, this final cut here, that pattern is reversed. So it looks very much as this individual, after a number of blows rained down onto his head, had perhaps turned around, and there's another blow that's gone to the back of the head.
These kind of blows can slice through the skull and into the brain tissue.
Oh, war is pretty brutal, isn't it, at the best of times? But imagine what it must have been like if you're fighting with these.
The forensic examination of the Hojo samurai's skeleton exposes a cruel truth about his death.
There's very little ante-mortem trauma. We would expect, if these were hardened soldiers who were paid to fight and fight and fight again, that many of them would have been through a number of battles, they would have had injuries which would have healed. So this looks much more like these were perhaps quite ordinary people who were then called to fight in a very desperate situation.
Like many samurai swearing allegiance to their lord, the fallen Hojo is a highly skilled swordsman, but not a professional soldier. All the evidence suggests this fatal fight is his first experience of combat. Samurai duels are stylized and mutually respectful affairs. At the very heart of samurai fighting culture, the katana sword.
We would always bow, and you draw the sword. The sword was the soul of the samurai. You would be treated with the utmost respect.
The duels are elaborate, with skilled adversaries sizing each other up, looking for gaps in the other's armor and technique.
As a strike comes in, I deflect once, and he's so fast he moves back into position and strikes again, which I deflect. As the strikes were deflected, I'd use the back of the blade, the soft part of the blade, and keep the hard edge pure and sharp. I'll drop down and give him a target. And as I give him a target, I'll move forward there, take his arm. The Japanese sword was designed on that curve, so whatever it touches, it would cut through the flesh, through the sinew, through the bone. And then I'd be in a nice position to take his head.
Stylized samurai swordplay remains unchanged in Japanese tradition to this day. "700 years ago, the precision engineering of the samurai katana is light years ahead of any other bladed weapon in the world. Forensic archaeologist Dr. Jason Lewis compares it with the broadsword of the knights of medieval England.
So here we see something that's quite characteristic with the European broadsword, which is having a very wide and shallow wall to the cut mark and producing very large flakes that come off. And there, as expected, the broadsword broke the bone in two. The blade is heavy enough and thick enough that it produces blunt force trauma and is strong enough to break a cow's thigh bone.
Lewis now wields the far lighter and more controllable katana.
So as we can see here, the marks are very long. The walls are much straighter because the force of the katana blade is being directed directly into the bone.
Though more subtle, the wounds are just as lethal, producing sharp force trauma. The katana is a precision killer so light that it can be wielded by a child. In 14th century Japan, samurai are trained from the age of 3. They're taught there's something special about their sword. It's an extension of the soul.
刀の中に神様の霊が宿って、それで自分の身を守ってくれる。
At their farm on the frontier of Kamakura territory, the wife and son of the slain Hojo samurai need God on the side of their sword. The Emperor's samurai remains hell-bent on destruction. It's now kill or be killed for the widow. The samurai woman is fighting for her house and child.
The female individual has had 2 blows to her head as well. Perhaps this woman was also fighting to defend her husband or defend the family or the homestead.
Terrible injuries to the widow's skeleton reveal she too duels with the Emperor's assassin. Proof of a brutal equality of the sexes in medieval Japan. Women must fight.
One of the great untold stories of Japanese history is the involvement in war of women. There aren't that many references, but the ones that are indicate that when the chips were down, the samurai women would fight every bit as bravely as men.
There was not the gender distinction that women were thought to be as civilians or non-combatants. If you were part of this warrior family, I believe that both men and women were in some ways almost equals.
They may not have been motivated in the same way by the loyalty to the clan or to the shogun, but they were defending their homes. And all women in Japan of the samurai class were trained in the use of weapons just in case.
With her husband dead, the samurai woman takes up the fight.
There's a sharp gash, but not quite cutting through, just about here, at the top of the head, very close to this suture. And another very deep gash here on the occipital bone. There's no healing at all, so we know that these blows happened very shortly before they died. So there's every intent to destroy these people.
The deep sword strike into the woman's skull causes massive brain trauma. Like her husband, she dies within seconds. The death of this family, and others like them, marks the beginning of a bloody war. Next, the Emperor's army advances towards the Hojo's fortress city of Kamakura.
The city of Kamakura was incredibly well defended by nature. On the southern side was the sea, and on all the other sides lay a ring of mountains, which cut it off completely from the outside world.
The treacherous route to Kamakura involves entering the 7 natural gorges, the perilous passageways that form the only way through the ring of mountains.
The paths are quite narrow. I mean, if you look that they're, we would call them just like a hiking path. And you see that they're coming through a gorge, and you could have warriors that would be above there shooting down at them.
The Battle of the Gorges is about to begin. This skeleton appears to be an early casualty. Buried alone, but close to a mass of bodies in the war grave, scientists believe this man dies as the civil war intensifies.
This is a very interesting skeleton, very enigmatic skeleton, buried in a single grave on his own. So that could suggest that there is something a little bit special about him. We know that he's broken his leg when he was much younger. We can see that in this tibia. There's quite a lot of curvature to it there. It's then healed. It caused this slight distortion of the bone. This bone is also significantly shorter than his left tibia, so he would have had a limp as he was walking.
His lameness offers a surprising clue to this man's identity. Extraordinarily, he may be a monk.
Many of the people who were monks because they had some kind of minor disability. Therefore, they couldn't do other kind of work, and therefore they became monks. It's quite interesting because a number of the historical texts and experts say that many of the young people who were killed in this battle were monks.
As the Emperor's campaign escalates, every Hojo of fighting age, monks included, must fight for their survival in a bloody civil war that ends in a trail of butchered corpses. Scientists examine a skeleton that suggests samurai monks are caught up in the heat of battle. Throughout Japan's history, warrior monks and the Buddhist monasteries play an important role in warfare. The written histories of the time refer to monks casting battle spells.
What's very interesting is there's the mindset of the time, which was that what causes victory in battle in a lot of ways was certain kinds of spells or maledictions or curses or whatever were thought to be very instrumental.
They would call down the wrath of the gods upon their enemies to bring them defeat, and that may well have produced some effect on the imperial powers, who were frightened that they were taking on these strange demonic spiritual powers, in addition to men who were armed with swords and spears.
The first crucial military act would be, in a lot of ways, to start having these curses, and they'd be performed for weeks.
There's also written evidence that in times of crisis, monks go into battle.
In 1333, there's one temple in particular where they dispatched a force of monks to actually fight. They were the ones that were enacting this original curse, as it were.
In the critical Battle of the Gorges, the Hojo need every man who can fight, monks included. The battle is fought not just with samurai swords. The uneven terrain is ideal for ambush from above, with Hojo samurai firing arrows at the Emperor's encroaching forces. Accounts of the time tell of brave Hojo fighters holding the Emperor's army at bay.
The attackers pressed forward with fresh men, time after time. So great were their numbers. The defenders held stubbornly in many engagements, so vital were their strongholds. Thunderously their battle cries and shouts on the three sides jarred the heavens and made the earth tremble. The Taiheki Chronicles.
Pressing home their advantage, the Hojo warriors leave themselves vulnerable to attack from the Emperor's own archers. The forensics on the monk are inconclusive. They don't reveal how he died. But frenzied fighting in the narrow gorges sees archery being used with devastating effect. A well-preserved skull from the mass grave reveals just how lethal the arrows are.
This is really fascinating. This is what I would call a classic projectile injury. What you've got is a little bit of bone that's torn away at the base of this injury. And there's a sort of V-shaped notch which looks very much like it corresponds to the edge of an arrow as it's gone in. If I take this arrow, you can see where this leading edge will just come in. It's actually come in this direction. This samurai may perhaps, move it, trying to even dodge the arrow, so it's come in at an angle rather than coming in at 90 degrees. hit with a lot of impact, a lot of velocity. It's gone straight through the bone, and the arrow's probably penetrated into the brain matter, so that's a lethal injury. He's not going to get up and walk away after he's had that.
The arrow penetrates the skull, causing a fatal brain hemorrhage. He dies instantly. But his death is not in vain. The Emperor's army fails to break through the gorges. But there is one further way to strike at the heart of Hojo territory. In the battle for Kamakura, the Emperor's samurai have one final and potentially devastating card to play. Playing it results in a massed pile of bodies on Kamakura Beach. One skeleton attracts particular attention.
This skull has got two injuries. There's a very deep gash running along the top of his head. But there is another blow to the back of the skull. Sword has come in and cut a slice right off.
The unusual shape of the gash along the top of the head indicates the blow came from above. Yet the sharp trauma matches a katana sword. And there are animal skeletons that solve the puzzle. Horses.
Both injuries are to the very top of the skull. So it's possible that this could have been a foot soldier and somebody on horseback hitting him. And perhaps even as the horse was rushing past, the second blow has come in at an angle and created this slicing effect rather than the normal kind of gash that we see on so many of these other skeletons. The injury to the top of his skull has all the characteristics of a samurai katana blade cut. It's got the length that's consistent with the length of the blade, coming in at an angle there.
Horses are ineffective in the confined terrain of the gorges. But in the final phase of the Civil War, a chance of nature allows the Emperor to unleash his powerful samurai cavalry on a weakened Hojo army. In the year 1333, the Kamakura coast has an exceptionally low tide.
The crucial moment in the fight to gain entry to Kamakura happened when the tide was far enough out to allow the Imperial Army to go round the rocky cape that stretched out into the sea and effect an entry into Kamakura from the southern side, in other words, from the direction of the sea.
The retreat of the sea opens the way for the Emperor's cavalry to charge. The sheer number of Hojo war dead confirms the battle turns into a massacre. The mass grave shows a horrifying range of wounds. An injury on one body suggests a particularly savage blow that probably kills a fallen Hojo.
This is the left hip bone. There's a cut mark here. If we go over to the skeleton here, I can show you what I mean. So the cut marks are right inside here. We can see that the angle is actually coming in from above. So it seems likely that he was lying on the ground and somebody was going past and just making sure that they were dead.
The katana blade, thrust through the abdomen, strikes the hip bone, causing massive internal hemorrhaging. This Hojo samurai bleeds to death in minutes.
It may well be some kind of coup de grace, which was routinely given to injured warriors as they were on the ground.
The dramatic accounts of the time describe a sea turned red by slaughter.
Assuredly was this a battle to decide great things, one such as would make it known generation to come whether those who contended were brave or cowardly. The Taiheki Chronicles.
More skeletons from another mass grave reveal how brutal the final slaughter becomes. Their injuries link them to the 1333 Civil War, and they offer new revelations. Two in particular arouse the curiosity of the forensic scientists. The largest mass of bodies from the slaughter on the beach includes broken bones and heads. Yet two skulls sit alone, and their cut marks are unusual.
Both of them were decapitated with blows to the back of the neck. We know that he's decapitated because we can see here on this third cervical vertebra, there's a cut right through the body. It's very smooth, there's a very clear straight line. You can see that some sharp instrument, very likely a sword, has come through at an angle. If you're going to decapitate somebody, you really want to catch the third or the fourth cervical vertebra. To catch the first or the second, you're going to hit the back of the skull, and you may also catch part of the jaw as you go through. In the individual that we're just talking about, the blade has come through from the back at an angle and has cut the third cervical vertebra, but sliced that off as it's come through. That's classic decapitation. Perhaps the person may have been alive, may have been captured, may have been down on his knees with the head bent down, so that the sword can come in and very cleanly decapitate.
The victorious imperial samurai take the heads of fallen Hojo as trophies. This macabre battle rite leaves more than 500 beheaded skeletons buried in the mass graves.
The best way to prove that you've disabled an enemy is to bring back their heads. Because if you have the enemy's head, then you can prove that this person is dead.
The two decapitated skulls under examination, however, lie separate from the mass of broken bodies. Mick Wazoki pieces the evidence together.
These two skulls were found together. This is an older individual and this is a rather younger individual. We can see that because on this skull, the cranial sutures are fused together and are starting to obliterate and bones just growing over those, and that's a sign of a rather older rather than a younger individual. This individual is of a reasonably young age because there's very little wear to the molar dentition, which ties in quite nicely with some of the historical documentation, which says that often there would be a master or a senior samurai with a younger lieutenant or somebody who is, perhaps in training to eventually take over this senior position.
The condition of their skulls offers the next vital clue to their identities.
It's been written that because people got credit for bringing in trophy skulls, But sometimes they would get skulls of people who weren't particularly prominent, and then they'd mutilate the face so you couldn't be able to recognize it. But there's no sense of mutilation here. So these may actually be very famous samurai.
As defeated Hojo samurai of high status, they attract special attention from the emperor's victorious army. On their knees, these two distinguished Hojo face a ceremonial execution. A single blow of a formal beheading severs the spinal cord. Death is instant. The skulls of high-ranking Hojo samurai, formally executed, is evidence of an unusual battle rite observed in medieval Japan.
There's one other tradition that's not generally known. Because of a very well-developed Japanese religious belief, certainly among the most high-ranking samurai, it was expected that the head would be returned to the family of the man who had been killed.
The execution of Hojo samurai leaders marks the end of the Battle of Kamakura Beach. The city now lies at the mercy of the victorious imperial army, and the emperor's retribution is ruthless.
The Battle of Kamakura ended in a bloody, burning inferno. Almost the entire city was alight. Fighting was going on everywhere. Men were being cut down among the smoke and the flames.
Those Hojo not slain in battle or massacred in the pillaging of the city flee to the hills.
So, at the end of the Battle of Kamakura, the Hojo family withdrew to the mountains round the edge of Kamakura, and there committed the largest act of mass suicide in Japanese history.
As Kamakura burns, hundreds of Hojo embrace the samurai code and take the only honorable way out.
One of the best-known traditions of the samurai is the ghastly ritual of seppuku, which is to commit suicide by cutting your abdomen open using a sharp dagger. This was well entrenched in samurai history, and an example that every samurai knew he would have to follow in order to save his honor when he had been defeated in battle and death was certain.
The fall of Kamakura wipes out the Hojo shogunate. Emperor Go-Daigo seizes power and stands as the undisputed ruler of all Japan.
Sudden transformation and the sort of overwhelming destruction of Kamakura is something you really see at no other time in Japanese history.
With a complete destruction of the Hojo family, Emperor Go-Daigo had achieved his objective. He could now reign as emperor just as his ancestors had done centuries before.
We tend to think of battles as places where there's great heroics, but there's also great human tragedy. All these types of injuries to ancient skeletons, it just reminds us what a very brutal and savage place the world used to be.